Because then the students will ask questions, hopefully, or not. That's the idea.
I don't know. Normally, as you maybe have the experience, Indonesian students is normally shy, yeah, Pak Sander. So we will see later whether they will be shy or not.
I'm afraid it's not that different from the Netherlands. But actually, what we learned during the COVID crisis, when we changed to all this online teaching, that and it's more easy for them to use the chat function to post questions. You know?
Yeah.
That's then they are less shy just to type some questions or whatever. Yeah, that's my experience. But, yeah.
I know that you also have some events here with our partner in Indonesia, right? I mean, I don't know. You also have the lectures with some students in UGM. Yeah, I don't know how. Maybe, yeah. You already know the experience with most of Indonesian.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Yeah, but it's nice to have. Yesterday I taught a class, which was also a very international class with people from Russia, from Greece, from China, from basically from anywhere. And it's always nice to have the international audience. Yeah. And this will be primarily Indonesian students, or there will be some people from other countries as well, or?
No, I think we prioritize our students. I think we have the undergrad and also master students, but I don't know their names quite. We have, but so I'm not so sure whether the people who will attend is from the bachelor or the master program. Yeah.
I won't make it too complicated. For the bachelor students.
Yeah, because our topic is about governance. Yeah, sometimes, and it reminds me when I was in the undergraduate level, governance topic is quite scary.
Abstract. Yeah. I know. Yeah. So yeah. But I do have a lot of images and concrete examples, etc. So I hope it will work.
It's always interesting to see your presentation. Yeah.
We'll see. Yeah.
And
actually there are several students still have class, and maybe they will join later. What do you think about that?
It's already 3 past. Okay. So you mean to say we need to start now? Yes, sure, no problem.
But it's depend on Mbak Landung maybe. What do you think, Mbak Landung?
No, we can start. Yeah, we can start now. I think 30 participants is quite enough.
30?
Yeah, 30.
Okay, really?
Okay.
Yeah. Or maybe we must wait for another student maybe until 35 or 40 maybe.
Yeah, that's okay. We can wait until 2-3 minutes from now. Yeah, Pak Sander. I hope that will be fine with you.
Oh, I'm fine with that, of course.
We have here also a lecture from other university. Ibu Prof Hardini. From hello Mbak Dini.
I see.
You can introduce yourself, Mbak Dini.
But it's interesting. We have this because Bobibi, you mentioned this about this flexibility, etc. But we have this expression in the Netherlands about the academic quarter, which is the academic 15 minutes. And this 15 minutes also refers to a kind of flexibility of being 15 minutes late or whatever. So I think we also have this this idea of in academia we are a bit flexible. Indeed, still waiting for students or someone is joining later or whatever. There's a kind of this flexibility, I guess. Yeah.
And I just heard about this. Is it already? I mean, this system is already there since long time back, or?
But it's not a formal system. There's more about culture. I mean, it's just this expression
I see.
academic quarter. You know, it's
the
not
academic quarter. I see.
No, it's just referring to the idea that there is some flexibility. You know. Yeah.
Academic quarter. Okay.
Yeah. It would be very different from Germany, for example.
Yeah.
But they definitely don't have this.
Yeah, I think
different
so.
culture again. Yeah.
I think so. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, Pak Sander, because yes, in the yesterday class, with Bulandung, it is on Thursday, right? When we got the studio class, I remind the students not being late. We need to start at 8. Maybe some of them is already here.
Yeah,
but not all.
Yeah.
And then so maybe we need to have this academic quarters as well, Bulandung.
Something like that.
Yeah. It's part of agreement, maybe before we start our class. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Pak Sander, maybe because also here we have like heavy rainfall, so maybe it's also influenced the connection of the students. I think not so many can participate to our lecture today, maybe this afternoon.
Yeah.
What about in your place, Bu Wiwi? Because in my home it's really heavy rainfall.
Yeah. It's rain here. Heavy rain, Pak. So we talk about climate resilience in the very rainy season. So exactly in the right moment.
It's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's more extreme than you are used to in this season, you think? Or it's always difficult to say, I know, but
I cannot say it. Yeah, maybe Bulandung, what do you think? For me, it's pretty normal in the rainy season, like every day in the certain period. Yeah, normally in the evening, afternoon up to evening.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could not agree more. Yeah, it's quite a pattern like this we have, but maybe because of the drought season is a little bit longer, and then quite a sudden you have this cold windy season in the maybe in the dusk, like 2 o'clock 3 o'clock in the morning is sometimes really annoying. Yeah, so hot in the daylight until afternoon, going down until night, and then in the dusk really cold and windy. Okay, Bu Wati, maybe we can start now. I think it's already have like 46 participants join us.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Bu Wati.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, let's start. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Yeah, good day everyone. Good afternoon for college student and participant from Indonesia, and good morning for Prof Sanders from Nijmegen, Netherlands. Goedemorgen. Yeah. First of all, I would like to say welcome to our international lecture series. Thanks for your time. Thanks for all audience for having us today. In this occasion, we have a special topic from 2 special lecturers. Our topic today is governance for climate resilient cities. Our first lecturer, the invited speaker, is Professor Sanders, Professor Sander Meijerink from our partner university, Department of Geography, Planning and Environment, Radboud University, Nijmegen, Netherlands. Thank you, Prof. Sanders. for your willingness to deliver your topic today. And the second lecturer is our beloved head of Department Urban and Regional Planning, Undip, Professor Wiwandari Handayani. Thanks also for Bu Wiwi. Yeah. Both of lecturer will deliver the topic for 30 until 45 minutes. After the complete presentation from the lecturers, we will open question and answer, and it is the discussion time. After all the questions are answered by the lecturers, we will have a closing ceremony, a closing remark from the chair of this international lecturer event, Dr. Iwan Rudiarto. Today is the last day of ELS in this semester. Okay, yeah, because the time is limited, maybe it's better for me to start our event today. Yeah, maybe Mbak Intan, can you help me to share the screen, the CV of Professor Sander? Yeah. Okay, let me begin by explaining or maybe reading the CV of our first lecturer, Professor Sander. Yeah, yeah, Professor Sander Meijerink. Yeah, maybe it's better I read the biography of Professor Sander. Yeah, he is a full professor of water governance. His research focused on water governance and climate change adaptation in international comparative perspective. Yeah, his research themes are flood risk management, the management of water scarcity and drought, water quality management, and climate-proof cities. Yeah, Professor Sander Meijerink is coordinator of the Master Specialization Cities, Water and Climate Change of the Water and Climate Change. Yeah. Okay, thank you, Mbak Intan. Of the Master Program in Spatial Planning and teaches in the International Master Program, Transnational Ecosystem Based Water Management, and in the Bachelor Program, Human Geography Planning and Environment. Yeah, actually, if you read all the CV of Professor Sander, we can recognize him, yeah, as an expert in his research expertise, yeah, very full with and long experience with water management, yeah. Okay, I think is it enough to explain about biography of Prof. Sanders, and maybe it's time for you, Prof. Sanders, to deliver your topic. Yeah. Is there anybody will help Prof. Sander to share the screen? Maybe Mbak Intan or Mbak Landung? Oh yeah, okay, Mbak Intan, thank you. Yeah, Prof. Sanders, the time is yours.
Thank you very much for this very nice introduction. Thank you also for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here and to share a bit of my experience and knowledge when it comes to the governance of climate resilience, and more specifically climate resilient cities. Well, what you can see here on my first slide is an image, and I'm pretty sure that the Indonesian students don't recognize the image because it's not a very famous place, but this is a small town, relatively small town in the southern part of the Netherlands, in the province of Limburg in the Netherlands. You may have heard via the media that last summer in Germany, in Belgium, and also in the Netherlands, in the southern part of the Netherlands, we had serious floodings. And this is just an image of this town that was flooded. And the interesting thing of this is, and also a bit the worrying thing, is that this was caused by heavy precipitation. I just learned that you do have heavy precipitation in Indonesia right now. The worrying thing is that all meteorologists, all experts, all flood risk management experts, etc., were actually very surprised, because they say, well, this amount of precipitation, this is typically the pattern that we would have expected, let's say, in 50 or 100 years from now, and not already now. So this clearly was an event that goes a bit beyond all the climate predictions that we had already. So that's a kind of worrying. So apparently this is now perceived as a sign that things are changing faster than we had expected beforehand. And you may have the image of the Netherlands, well, that they do have a reputation, of course, in flood risk management. I will come back to that later. And overall, I would say, well, they do pretty well, but still, we face enormous issues. Well, fortunately, in the Netherlands, we did not have casualties, so nobody died because of the floodings, which was very different from our neighboring countries, Germany and Belgium, because it was serious floodings there. The next slide, please. So that's on floodings, on extreme precipitation, high precipitation levels. But at the same time, also in the Netherlands, which is known to be a water abundant country, because we do have a lot of water, even then we still face serious problems with water shortage and drought. We've had, not last summers, but the 3 years before, 3 years in a row during summer, because of extremely, for Dutch standards, high temperatures and long periods of hardly any rainfall, we had a serious problem with water shortage, which basically is to say that we did not have sufficient water to meet all water demands. You have an image here now of one of the main rivers in the Netherlands, and you see that the water table is really low. And this caused serious problems for navigation, because the vessels could not carry the load that they usually carry and transport. So there was a lot of economic damage. We did not have sufficient water during these summers to for all irrigation purposes for agriculture. We had not sufficient water for all industries to produce. So it was really, and you would not expect it, I would say, also for the Netherlands, that we face issues of water scarcity and drought. So clearly it's about extremes. It's periods where we do have excessive rainfall, and it's periods where we do have basically a shortage of water. And the predictions are that due to climate change, of course, these extremes will occur more frequently. In some way, we have to deal with that. Next slide, please. Then looking at because the topic is the governance of climate, urban climate resilience, then looking at the relationship between climate change and cities, the urban element, I would say there's a two-sided relationship there. So on the one hand, you could argue that urbanized areas, that cities, that they contribute the most to climate change. So that's where most economic activity takes place, where most pollution takes place, where most carbon emissions take place, happen. That's where also most transport takes place, etc. So these cities, they contribute the most to climate change. At the same time, cities are also most vulnerable, of course, because that's where the people live, that's where most economic activity is there, that's where most assets are. So it's a difference when you have a flooding in a rural area or in an urban area. So it's a kind of two-sided relationship. On the one hand, they contribute the most, at the same time, they also suffer the most. But the good thing is, and that's the optimistic story, the positive story, that in cities, usually there's most dynamics. It's also the places where there's most creativity, where there's most possibility for innovations. So cities also, fortunately, offer very good possibilities, both for climate mitigation and for climate change adaptation. Yes, next slide, please. talking about this relationship between urban areas, between cities and climate change, there is an interesting difference between high-income countries and low-income countries, or it's a bit old-fashioned terminology like developed countries or developing countries. And both have their own specific problems. And that's also relevant to all kinds of governance issues that we face, for example, in Europe, which I consider then as part of the high-income countries. The problem that we face is that we do not have that much population growth, or that we even in some areas do have decline. And because of that, the dynamics is much less than, for example, in Indonesia. You could say, well, that's an advantage. Well, it's a nuanced story. Maybe not. The problem is that we hardly build new neighborhoods. We hardly build new urban areas. I mean, the building stock is already there. The houses are already there, and only about 2% of the building stock is renewed every year. When you want to climate-proof houses, when you want to build and develop climate-neutral houses, we have to deal with the existing building stock. And when you develop new, it's way easier to do it at once in a good way, to develop climate neutral, to develop climate proof, etc. It's much more costly and more complicated to change the existing building stock. Well, in low-income countries, you see a very different pattern, of course. You know about that. We have rapid urbanization, we have population growth, we have a need for new housing, etc. Which in principle, you would say, well, that's a good opportunity because then you can do it in a new and better way. But you also know from practice that that's hardly happening because there's sometimes a lack of financial resources, there's a lack of institutional capacity to do this. So both types of countries, they do have problems, but they are very different. And when you look about the governance of climate change adaptation and working towards resilience, I think that's important to keep in mind. And that's also to say that you cannot just copy paste the solution that's used in, let's say, the Netherlands and copy paste it to Indonesia or the other way around, because that won't work, because the essence of the problem is very different, actually. Next slide, please. Then I had to make a choice because there's so many different things to tell about when you think about the governance of climate resilience. And I would like to zoom in a bit more on a topic that I'm familiar with, and that for sure, looking at climate change impact on cities is a very important topic. That's the issue of flooding. Why is it important? Because so many big cities in the world are delta cities, and exactly these are the places that are growing, that are expanding. And you have examples of these in Indonesia, of course, as well. The classic examples like Jakarta, but also Semarang. And here I have an image of a mega city, basically in China, the conglomeration of Hong Kong, Shenzhen, and Guangzhou. If I pronounce it well, I don't know. But there's more than 120 million people living there in this delta city, which basically is vulnerable to both sea level rise and increasing river discharges, and also exactly the combination of the two. But this is but one example. That is an extreme example, looking at the number of inhabitants. But well, there's many examples across the globe of similar cities. Yes, please. Then we go back to this very tiny, small country, the Netherlands, because we are, well, basically also an example of such a delta city. On the left hand of this slide, you see depicted the areas experiencing flood risk in the Netherlands, and in the blue, it's indicated the percentage, the dark blue, the percentage of the country situated below sea level. And in the light blue, it's indicated other areas, basically the areas along the main rivers in the Netherlands, which are also vulnerable to flooding. The right-hand side of the slide, unfortunately, that one is in Dutch, but the graph it's not that complicated to understand. What it basically says is that the dark red colored areas, the provinces of Noord-Holland, Utrecht, and Zuid-Holland, three provinces in the western part of the Netherlands, they are the most densely populated. So that's the most densely populated part of the Netherlands. Well, when you make the comparison between the map on the left side and on the right side, you can immediately see that the area where most people live is the area that is also vulnerable to flooding because it's situated below sea level. So we are just another example, basically, of a delta city, very vulnerable to flooding. So we face that challenge and also that governance challenge as well within our country. Yes, next slide, please. Well, exactly because of this geographic position of the Netherlands, we were basically forced to think about, well, how then can we deal with flood risk management? And then in line with that, also what are the governance challenges? And one of the conceptual ways of thinking in terms of adaptation to climate change when it comes to flooding, adaptation to increasing water levels and to river flooding, to sea flooding, is the conceptualization of flood risk as a kind of multi-layered phenomenon. This is called the concept of a multi-layered water safety. Basically saying that we can distinguish between three layers of water safety, where you see on the bottom of the figure, you see what we call the first layer of water safety. That's about the challenge to keep the water out of an area. And that's what I would say what we are particularly good at it in the Netherlands, because that's the bit classical, maybe even you could say old-fashioned way of dealing with flood risk. That's about constructing major infrastructures, dike infrastructures, dams, etc., to keep the water out. The second layer is more about spatial planning. So that's about what can you do to limit the damage, to limit the potential damage in case a flood event happens. For example, by elevating new neighborhoods, by elevating infrastructure, by taking wise planning decisions. So if you plan a new hospital, for example, maybe it's not wise to plan that hospital along a river. Maybe it's not a wise decision to plan that hospital in the deepest part of a polder area. And actually, we've seen not recent, but planning decisions taken, let's say 10 or 15 years ago in the Netherlands, where we exactly decided to plan a hospital near to a river, which, yeah, you would say is not such a wise decision. So that's about layer 2, that's about spatial planning. Then we have on top here, we have layer 3. That's another challenge. That's another governance challenge as well. That's about planning for evacuation. That's emergency management. That's about warning systems, etc. So if the flood strikes, how to get the people out of an area. That can be horizontal evacuation, what we call. So people really get out of an area. That can also be what we call vertical evacuation. That people go to high-rise buildings or that they go to the highest part of a specific area. And you can plan for that, what people should do. Well, the idea of multi-layered water safety is that you somehow have to balance between these different layers. And you can need to find out in a specific area, where do you put the emphasis on? What you can imagine, talking about governance, I will come back to governance issues the second part of my presentation, of course, but governance is always related to the content. You can imagine for a layer 1 approach, you need a different form of governance, because basically the idea is you need to have this dike, you need to maintain the dike, you need to construct the dike. And in many cases, you might do that with more classic governmental approaches like regulation, etc. In terms of planning, you have to do with many different stakeholders. I mean, it is much more, the second layer has way more impact for all kinds of spatial functions. So you would need to coordinate across sectors way more than in layer 1. So the need for cross-sector coordination, cross-sector governance, stakeholder participation is way more important. Talking about emergency planning and management, you would typically need to coordinate between water authorities, the organizations that are responsible for healthcare, police, fire brigade, etc. And they have their own different organizational structures that needs to be tuned, coordinated, etc. And in the end, when it's about emergency management, it's a very hierarchical governance model, because that's what we know. Top-down decision-making hierarchy works very well when we need to manage a crisis. Then you do not have the time to have endless deliberation, stakeholder participation, etc. So it's a bit depending on the layer also which modes of governance you would need. Next slide, please. Well, this is just another conceptualization of this idea of flood risk management. Well, it's one of the elements of resilience, I would say, where you could say, what's the classical definition of a risk? Risk is the probability times the impact of flooding. So if you want to reduce flood risks, you can try to reduce the probability of a flood event, or you can try to reduce the impact of a flood event. Well, what then can you do to reduce the probability? You can take these technical measures. You can, for example, raise a dike. You can build a new dike. You can build a dam, etc. You can also take spatial measures to reduce the probability of flooding. You can give space to water, for example, room for the river, etc. Which is also an effective strategy in reducing the probability of a flood event. But the other side of the coin is you can also try to reduce the impact of a flood event. You can decide, for example, indeed to reduce the exposure to a flood event. You can say, well, we do no longer want to develop in a flood-prone area. You can do that by developing certain regulations, simply inhibiting development in a floodplain. You can do that. But you can also try to reduce the vulnerability of the people living in a flood-prone area. You can waterproof housing, maybe developing houses on pillars, floating houses, etc. And you can reduce vulnerability by having good early warning systems in place, evacuation strategies, etc. So this again, similar to the image depicting the layers of water safety, sketches that there's a broad range of strategies that you may use. Next slide, please. These are some examples basically of these strategies. And when you look at this first layer, trying to keep the water out, reducing the probability of flooding, well, then the primary coast defense, for example, in the Netherlands is a classic example of that. We do have the natural dunes, the sandy dunes along the coast that protect our country and a lot of basically the urbanized part of the Netherlands. So it's a very important part of this urban resilience in this case. But there's some innovations there in the sense that, well, and that's similar, I think, to many places in Indonesia, that space is really scarce and there's a high population density, and you need somehow to use space in a very efficient and smart way. So this idea of multifunctional land use becomes very important there. And you see here, for example, an example of the integration of a parking lot within the primary flood defense. So this is about multifunctional land use. Making the translation to governance, that's a very important governance issue, of course, because you need all the different parties responsible for running this parking lot, this parking garage, the municipality, those responsible for the maintenance and the construction of the specific infrastructure here, which is integrated into the dunes. So the water management, they all need to be involved. Because this really requires a lot of, let's say, collaborative planning efforts to make this a success. Next slide, please. This is but another solution, very popular nowadays. You may have heard about that. So that's about nature-based solutions. That's about using the forces of nature to try tackle, in this case, water management issues, using the forces of nature to become climate-proof and more climate resilient. There's but two examples. The one on the left side is from Actually, from where my university is, pretty close to Nijmegen, you see an example of what we call a Room for the River project. So image to create room for the river again. So we in the past, we took a lot of space from the river, and now we try to create space for the water again, so that we can cope with higher levels of water. On the right-hand side, you see another example of building with nature. It's called the sand engine, in Dutch, the zandmotor. This is about our coastline. Our coastline basically is not sustainable. If you would do nothing, then the coastline would gradually erode, and we will definitely be flooded in the Netherlands. So what basically is being done is that continuously we take a lot of sand from the sea, and we have to transport it to the coastline, and then we disseminate this along the coastline, because otherwise, just as to compensate for all the erosion that takes place. Well, what the idea of the sand engine is that we said, well, maybe we can prevent a situation that we need to do this continuously, and maybe we should create a huge reservoir of sand, and you see it basically here on this picture. So we bring way more than we would actually need sand to one place, and this is somewhere pretty close to Rotterdam. And then due to the natural current, the natural flow, the natural current along our coastline, gradually this sand will be disseminated along the coastline, which also helps to protect the country and to make the country basically more climate resilient against flooding. So these are kind of new solutions. Yes, next slide, please. These are other examples that you may be familiar with. That's about urban greening. On the left-hand side, you see a wadi. This is basically a place that's deliberately created in the landscape that's a bit lower than the surroundings. So the rainwater is collected there, and there is space for the water just to infiltrate in the soil, just as it would do in a natural situation. But often such places are lacking in urban environments. As you may see, this is a relatively new urban neighborhood, and there deliberately these places were created to deal with rainwater. On the right-hand side, you see just strategies of urban greening, in this case, green roofs in the city of Amsterdam, which of course is also helpful. But also here you imagine that a whole new range of governance issues pop up, because what about the ownership of these roofs? How can we arrange that? Can we make use of these roofs, etc.? Are we always dependent on the private owner or not? Or can we develop regulations that we can use all these roofs to use that for urban greening? Next slide, please. This is a classic example of floating houses. I've seen floating houses in Samarang as well. So it's happening in many places across the globe. Well, there's a nuanced story here whether this is really helpful for climate change adaptation. I mean, so far it has only been done on a very relatively small scale. It's of course also attractive for people to live there. They enjoy the view on the water. These are some nice kind of houses, so nothing wrong with that. But well, if the flood strikes, maybe these people then are in a good position. But what then you think about the surrounding areas there where people also live? So you would still need to do something probably to keep the water out. So it's not an ultimate solution, definitely not. Let's move on, please. Next slide. Thank you. This is about planning for evacuation. Actually, I already mentioned that. This is another area in the Netherlands, a very densely populated area again. You cannot see it here on the map, but it's pretty close to the sea, and it's also a place where many different rivers come together. So it's actually a pretty risky area, you could say, or at least vulnerable to flooding. So you need to think through all flood risk management strategies. And what you see here, the dots and the circles on the papers, is just a plan for vertical evacuation. So it was deliberately thought through where people should go to in case a flood would strike. Yes, please. And this is but another example, not from the Netherlands in this case. This is from the US, where they do have a system of flood insurance in place. Here you see the role of the market, of the insurance industry, because you could have a system in place where you do have a system of flood insurance, where the insurance industry says, basically in the flood-prone areas, well, in the areas that are too risky, where the probability of flooding is too high, you do no longer have the possibility to buy flood insurance. That's a way of steering spatial behavior. It can be. Of course, we also know, and that might be the same issue in Indonesia, we have that issue in the US as well, that then in the end, you may end up with a situation that the poor live in these areas. They cannot afford to buy insurance anyway. So, and these are the cheapest places to live there, and then they end up in flood-prone areas, which is still an issue. But in principle, by means of insurance, you can to some extent also steer spatial behavior. Yes, please. But the question, of course, is on this governance of climate resilience, how to realize climate resilience cities. So the governance question always is on this how question. Well, I gave some examples, more substantive examples of projects, and I already pointed a bit to some governance issues. Talking about governance, it's always useful to distinguish between what we call three spheres or parts of government. That's the role of the government, that's the role of the market parties, and that's the role of civil society. So the government would typically develop regulations, zoning policies, building codes, etc. That's the instruments that governments usually have to try influence spatial behavior. But we also have market forces, and I already briefly pointed to this idea of private flood insurance, for example, where the insurance industry, these are private parties, operate on the market and also to some extent influence spatial behavior, and they can play a role in climate change adaptation as well. And of course, there's a role for civil society, for NGOs, for citizens, for all non-governmental organizations. For example, when you think about community resilience, the things that communities can do to adapt to the impacts of climate change. So bear in mind always these three spheres that can play a role. Yes, please. My presentation is about the governance of urban climate resilience. Then it's also important when you ask this governance question to think through what kind of resilience are we talking about. And I won't have time to go too much into detail here, but I want to give some more information and some warnings also related to this concept of resilience. But my first point is that I would like to make is that there's very different definitions of resilience around. These are two very important ones in the literature, but they are way more. Be aware of that. The engineering resilience basically refers to this idea of bouncing back. It's about the ability of a system to maintain its functions, to stay in place, even though there are some external perturbations, even though there's a flood event or whatever. It's all aimed at keeping the system as it is. That's engineering resilience. And the second one is slightly different. That's the concept of ecological resilience. And indeed, the concept originally was developed in the field of ecology, but it has come to dominate discussions in planning as well. That's the concept of ecological resilience, which is not just about bouncing back, but it's also about bouncing forward. It's also about not just maintaining the system as it is, but also about how should we change the system to be better able to cope with a flood event later on. So you have to keep that in mind, that there's different forms of resilience. When you read something about resilience, be careful. What kind of resilience are people referring to? Yes, please. Then the other question is, when you want to say something about the governance of resilience, what kind of resilience are we talking about? Resilience of what? Is it about an individual, an organization, a council, a community, a city, a water management system, etc., etc.? And that matters, because depending on the answer to this question, you may make a different kind of analysis and reach different conclusions. It's about resilience to what? Also a very important question. Is it about sea flooding, river flooding, pluvial flooding? Is it heat stress? Is it whatever? And to what end? And that's a bit related to the definitions that I presented. Is it just to keep the system as it is? Is it about recovery? Is it about changing the system? Is it about bouncing forward indeed, as it is called in the literature? Is it towards more sustainability? So what are you aiming for when you're talking about this resilience? Yes, please. Just to make this point, how important it is when you think about the governance of resilience to know what we are talking about. Just for this topic that I spoke about for flood risk management, I picked 4 definitions that I could find in the literature, 4 different definitions of resilience. And if you read these, you will see that they are really very different, but more importantly, that they are even sometimes contradictory. So the first definition is resilience is, or the resilience of an urban agglomeration is one in which several different flood risk management strategies are applied simultaneously. So think about this idea of multi-layered water safety. Think about this range of strategies that you may use, reducing the probability of flooding, reducing the exposure, vulnerability, etc. Well, if you do that all together somehow, then it's resilient. That's the statement made here. But then looking at a second definition, which also comes from the academic literature, flood resilience is not about flood prevention, but about integrated urban planning, living with water and flood tolerance. This definition basically says construction of dikes and dams is not contributing to resilience. That's interesting, eh? What then about the Netherlands, I'm thinking? That's quite extreme. Then the third one, also an interesting one, and there is some truth in it, I would say. Resilience to infrequent larger floods requires episodic learning from frequent smaller ones. By preventing such learning, flood control compromises resilience. This definition of resilience also points again to the fact that if you have a flood control infrastructure in place, as we have in the Netherlands, for example, with the probability of flooding in 1 in 10,000 years, basically this definition states, yes, but then you do hardly face flood events any longer. You do not longer know how to cope with that. You do not longer know what to do, how to deal with these flood events. So you do not longer learn about that. So then you become less adaptive. So then the construction of a dike actually comes at the cost of flood resilience. It's detrimental to flood resilience. That's interesting. And the last sentence also points in that direction. Flood control infrastructure contributes to a lack of flood awareness and a false sense of security to increase long-term flood risk. Well, I definitely agree with the first part, indeed. And we have that in the Netherlands as well, because we have such high standards for our dikes and dams, etc. People feel safe, and indeed flood awareness in the Netherlands is extremely low, you could say. Is it a false sense of security? Maybe it is. You know, it's all about probabilities. In the end, the dikes may break at some point, and particularly given all kinds of climate change scenarios that may become more likely in the long run. But what you can see here, and that's my issue, depending on how you define resilience, you may come up with different strategies. And when you come up with different strategies, you always also need a different form of governance, of course. Next slide, please. And this is also interesting because resilience is such a complicated, fuzzy, multi-interpretable concept. You find a lot of factors in the literature pointing to all kinds of governance issues of what you would need to enhance resilience. And these are some of the factors that actually is based on a literature review are mentioned frequently in this literature. So one of these factors is redundancy. So that's the idea, referring back to this example of multi-layered water safety again. that you need it all. So do not just invest in dikes, also do something in the field of spatial planning, also invest in emergency management, etc. You would typically need a combination of the strategy. Redundancy. But bear in mind, there's also a tension here with efficiency, because you can spend your last euro only once. And if you do not invest it in the dike, that may lead to a higher frequency of flooding. So redundancy is not always efficient. Another very important capital or a factor that's mentioned is the factor of social capital, talking about community resilience, what communities can do. Social capital is very important. So translating it to governance, then building social capital is a very important strategy. Awareness is very important to be resilient, for people to know what they should do, and for their willingness to undertake action. So in terms of governance, awareness raising campaigns is a very important issue. People need to be able to learn from flood events, to learn what they should do, to learn what works well, what does not, also to learn lessons and to use that the next time the flood strikes. So it's about enhancing learning capacity. It's also about all kinds of institutional variables. It can be about zoning policies. I already referred to that. Financial resources is obvious. If you want to undertake action, if you want to develop projects, if you want to redevelop a specific area, you need the financial resources. So this raises all kinds of issues on maybe public-private partnerships. How can we find the funding, external funding, maybe to realize projects? It's also about leadership. It's not just about institutions, resources, etc. You need entrepreneurial, active people taking the lead, who have an interest in climate proofing a city, in undertaking action, in changing the situation. And there's a lot to learn there. What then are good leadership strategies? How do people manage these networks of actors that you would need to realize a change? It clearly is about knowledge, about scientific knowledge on what then are the impacts of climate change in a specific place. Which kind of knowledge would you need? It's about communicating, transferring this knowledge to the right level of governance. It's about having early warning systems in place, etc., etc., etc. So it's a very long list of governance factors and governance issues that you can think about. Yes, please. I think my final slide for today with some conclusions that I would like to draw, and I think that's my message for today. The first one, that was already at the beginning of my presentation, that bear in mind that the challenges that we face, for example, in the Netherlands or in Germany, there are similarities, but there are also very important differences, for example, with the challenges that you face in Indonesia. So that's the difference between rapidly growing countries and where we have in Europe, where it's basically population and economic growth is relatively limited at the moment. So this leads to different challenges because, for example, of this, what I told you about the dynamics of in the building stock. Talking about the governance of resilience, bear in mind and be aware that resilience is defined in different ways. What kind of resilience are they talking about? Resilience for what? For whom? For what purpose? Resilience to what, etc. So always when you read about resilience somewhere or you hear someone speaking about resilience, try to answer these questions. What kind of resilience are we talking about? Then about the governance, I pointed to governance issues, I think, in many places during my presentations. What you can get from that it's not just a governance issue. I mean, it's a very broad range of issues. And also here you should ask the question, well, what am I talking about? Is this about the governance of awareness? Is this about specifically community self-organization? Is this the governance issue of how various levels of governments need to coordinate or work together? Is this about what role the market can play in solving these issues? These are all very different governance issues. You can think about setting up networks, platforms where people can meet and discuss, deliberate, negotiate, etc. But you can also think about more agency leadership perspectives, like the key individuals that play a crucial role in these processes. What do they typically do? What strategies can they use, etc. This is all about governance. So if you want to contribute somehow with your research, maybe a master thesis or a bachelor thesis or whatever, or a paper that you write, if you want to contribute to this knowledge, I think you would first need to specify then how actually do you define resilience, of course making use of the literature, and also specify a bit further in which governance issue you're specifically interested in. Okay, these are my takeaways for today, and that's also the end of my presentation.
Okay, very great presentation. Thank you, Prof. Sanders, for your inspiring presentation. From your presentation, we can learn the best practice of Netherlands, and we can conclude that governance is the key stakeholder in making climate resilient city. But actually, there are several homework, and challenging for the government if they want to make a climate resilient city. Actually, we have a question and answer session, but for the participant, keep your question. We will have the discussion session after the second presentation, but you can write your question in the chat, and you can ask or write the question by Bahasa Indonesia. Okay. And then it is time for the second presenter. Maybe Mbak. Okay. I will read the CV of Professor Wiwandari Handayani. Actually, she is now our head of department, Urban and Regional Planning Department, Diponegoro University. There are several responsibility of her, head of Center for Urban and Regional Resilience Research, CURE, Deputy Chief Resilient Officer, head of the Research Division of IUCCA Semarang, head of Laboratory of Regional Development in the past maybe, and the famous and very beloved lecturer for students. Okay, there are several very long experience regarding to the resiliency, and she already got her professorship in the core of resilient city, I think. The governance in making a resilient climate city. I think we can read. There are several research about resilient city. Okay, it's time for Prof. Wiwi, to deliver your topic today. Prof. Wiwi, time is yours.
Thank you, Bu Wati, for the opportunity, and also thank you, Pak Sander, for the interesting presentations. Great to have this opportunity to be in one event with you, Pak Sander, to talk about governance and resilience. And here we also have some participants, mostly from our students, from the bachelor and master students, and hoping that what you have shared also gives some ideas for them to initiate some research related to the resilience issues and in the context of governance. I would like only to add some highlighted things about resilient city based on the case of Semarang. And for this opportunity, the focus of the presentation is on how we promote the integrated planning to create a kind of resilient city. And I think Semarang would be the right case for that, because as you have mentioned, resilience to what? And as we know, Semarang has been facing a lot of disturbance, challenge the city to become more resilient. And I would like to talk about that in this presentation. And most of the materials is actually taken from my publication with my colleague, Pak Rukuh, Bu Bintang, and also our colleague from the World Bank. We had the opportunity to write about Semarang. So Semarang was chosen by the World Bank to be explored as one not really big metropolitan, but metropolitan cities in Indonesia that we learn something from the Semarang experience. For the participants, I will be happy if you can download and learn something from this. And actually, the series of this World Bank book explain about some cities, not only in Semarang. And if you want to see the more complete version, you can also access from the link that showing on the slide, on the right hand, on the my right hand. It was launched in June, a couple months ago. So for this opportunity, I will give you only a brief intro and then some highlights about Semarang and how I think spatial and cross-sectoral is very important to promote a more efficient governance system, of course, in the end of the day, to create a more resilient city. And I would like to start the argumentation by saying that integrated planning is, of course, very important, because it will create, again, a more efficient, cost saving, and a lot of benefits in time and also money invested. And that is also a reason why very important to talk about integrated planning. And again, I believe Semarang might has a good option for the case study, because not only because the disturbance that the city has been facing, but also the city has a unique window of opportunity. And it has been, how we can see how it has been created kind of approach or pathway to create integrated planning, the application in the city. To some extent, the city has significant challenges. I call it that the city has experienced sinking city, and at the same time also rapid urbanization. And because of this, there are also opportunity for the Semarang to be engaged in the global network, focusing on climate change and resilience. It has been started in about a decade ago. The city is a part of the Asian Climate Change Cities Resilience Network, and continued by the involvement in the 100 Resilient Cities Network. And through this involvement, I think there have some transformative movement in a way that may create a more innovative approach for the city in addressing the disturbances. And we can see later, whether we can call it that the Semarang has been resilient, or on the way to be resilient, or how do you think about that? Especially Pak Sander in the earlier presentation has mentioned about engineering resilience and socio-ecological resilience. Then maybe you can further thought how it is operationalized in Semarang city. And to start talking about the Semarang, I'm sure all the participants here has been very familiar with the city, but I would like to emphasize a little bit about the city that because of the location, it is located between biggest city in Indonesia, metropolitan or even megapolitan at the moment, Jakarta and Surabaya. So actually, Semarang is not very developed very fast in the earlier decade of Indonesian development in the New Order era, long time back, about 50, 60 years ago. Jakarta grows so fast, and it now becomes like a giant megapolitan in Java. And then Surabaya followed the development of Jakarta because of the location. The two cities regard as the growth center for Indonesian development, Jakarta for the western part and Surabaya for the eastern part. And Semarang located in somewhere in between. And that is why in the first era of Indonesian development, the city is not developed so fast compared to Jakarta and Surabaya. But then when the situation considered like Jakarta and Surabaya is somehow overwhelmed with the development and face so many urban issues, Semarang comes or show the potentials because the city can offer a more convenient place for living, because it's not too big. The congestion is not very bad. The traffic is manageable. The weather, the pollution is quite okay compared to Jakarta and Surabaya. And people start to thinking, Semarang is quite convenient to live compared to the very biggest crowded city like Jakarta and Surabaya. But at the same time, Semarang then grows very fast, maybe starting 2-3 decades ago, and the development take place along with a lot of various urban challenges, and as Pak Sander also has been mentioned earlier, the common challenges not only faced by Semarang city but also many cities worldwide is flood. So maybe when we talk about resilience to what, then we may say disaster resilience to flood becomes very dominant in a lot of in the academic discourse when we talk about resilience. And another I think important thing to be highlighted when we talk about Semarang development is the fact that there have been what we call as coastline evolution in Semarang, that as you can see here, from the 9th to 19th century, there has been a changing coastline in the city. If you can check in the following notes on the map, for example, for those who already familiar with Semarang, the Sampokong area, the Bergota area that is currently now regarded as located in the city center, actually a long time back, it is very close to the coastline. And accordingly, as you can see from the current slide, the next slide, the coastline of Semarang city is long time back is very different with what we have at the moment. The densest area of the current Semarang initially is like a sea, is water, and the coastline now is not the one that we have in the 10 centuries ago, and that is also the reason why the soil and everything in the city center is they call it as young alluvial and becomes more prone to challenges or disturbances because of flood and any other water related issues. and the issues becomes more prominent because the city developed in this area, in this in the area where initially it was like a water area, water body, not land, and the soil type and everything in the city center related with the physical characteristic is not strong enough to accommodate the urban growth, the concentration of the commercial and very dense commercial activities in the urban center. That's another challenges that need to be faced by the city, because as you can see, initially it was only like small Dutch settlement, Kota Lama, and then it becomes growing so fast, and at the current situation, even the development already spread out up to the upstream in the outskirts of the city, and it grows so fast. And even it create what we call as kedung sepur, the regionalization. Not only Semarang, the development is not only focusing on the Semarang administrative area, but also spread into the different administrative area in the surrounding regions. And of course, it creates another governance challenge, because then the cooperation among different local government between Semarang and the surrounding regions become another issues to be addressed when we talk about some urban, or let's say flood water related issues that is likely cross boundary. The flood may be in Semarang because it is located in the coastal area, but the source of the flood might be related to the area in the different region, in the neighboring region of Semarang city, maybe in Kendal, maybe in Demak, or maybe in Semarang district, for example. And we can learn from the milestone of Semarang development, for following my earlier explanation on the challenge that the city faced, because of initially the coastline has been changed quite significant, and as you can see, the very dense area in the city is actually formed by a very young types of soil, young alluvial, and it cannot accommodate the very rapid development taken place in the area. As a matter of fact, as you can see, the old city Semarang, that already been developed since about 3 decades ago, is located. It's number 1 here, and if you learn from the previous image showing the coastline is initially is just simply a water body. And all the old city center is located very close to the coastal because of the trading activities, close to the harbor and so on. And it creates old city center becomes more prone because of the there's not enough strong foundation for the dense build up density in the area. And the development still remain on that side, from the since 3 centuries ago up to the current situation. All the very important facilities in the city is actually located in a very prone and vulnerable area. And even when I mentioned one of the stresses or maybe a disturbance faced by the city, it's not only because of the flood, not only because of the flash flood, the normal flood because of the rainfall, but also because of the tidal flood, or ROP, and there's another challenge, not only because of the sea level rise, because of the maybe related to the climate change, but also because of the land subsidence. The land subsidence has been taking place because the main reason maybe because the groundwater extraction, but also because the types of the soil itself, that cannot accommodate the very dense development that taken place in the area. So you can imagine if we see Semarang there, the city has been quite significant challenges, and need to be addressed, and how we can responsible to see whether the city can be regarded as the resilient cities or not, and we can argue about that. Jumping to talking about the initiative in Semarang to deal with those kind of problems, facing by the city. One of the interesting initiative that might become an interesting lesson learned is the success story. We call it as the urban regeneration project in Garang River Basin, or it's very famous to be called as Semarang West Canal or Canal Banjir Barat. Even because of the success of the development, it is now currently replicated to the Semarang East Canal. The city start with the West Canal because I think it's only my own interpretation. The East Canal is have a more complicated challenge and system because there are more people live in the East Canal compared to the West Canal, and that is why there's start to create what I call as quite integrative approach to anticipate the flood, and also considering the situation on the surrounding area through the Semarang West Canal development project. And I will go back to the West Canal again, but one related project with the West and East Canal is Kampung Bahari development. So I think Pak Sander, when you were in Semarang maybe 5 or 6 years ago, maybe Pak, you've been here in Kampung Bahari. At that time, the situation is maybe quite different. If you remember, we were in the market in Kampung Bahari. It is now already disappeared, and this is, if you see the blue building on the right upper side, is the new market located in the Kampung Bahari. And then there's also another development is the public vertical housing development. We've been there also, Pak Sander, in the vertical housing in the Tambak Lorok area where the Kampung Bahari is located, and it is one of the approach that have been done by the government to provide sufficient housing and affordable housing for the people who live there as a part of the urban regeneration program in the Kampung Tambak Lorok. And this is one initiative that has been done by the city. It is also in one package when we talk about West and East Canal development. A little bit illustration of West Canal before and after. What we can tell about the Semarang West Canal project, it is quite integrative because it provides, I call it as co-benefit project, because it is not only thinking about flood control, ensuring the sustainability of the water supply, and then also, as maybe you have been mentioned also, Pak Sander, in your earlier presentation about the blue-green principle, infrastructure principle in developing the area. There's not only 3 main components, including the river normalization, dam development, construction, drainage system, and so on. But what we can tell about this project is the integration, how they try to integrate the initiative to solve the flood problems from the upstream to the downstream area. So, for example, in the upstream area, they built the dam Jatibara, and then in the midstream area, they the project focused on the river normalization and the drainage improvement system, and in the downstream area, the project focused on the urban regeneration in the Kampung Bahar, in the coastal area. I'm sorry. in the coastal area. And not only focusing on this kind of infrastructural project, they also try to develop a kind of community development initiative for the people who live along the river or along the canal, from the upstream to the downstream. So they develop a kind of local community approach, including natural resource preservation. For example, in the dam, there's monkey preservation program there, and maybe for Pak Sander, it maybe looks so strange to see the picture on the left side, downside, but for most Indonesian, who maybe most of us don't have any idea how the snow looks like. So for example, as a part for the local community development, we develop what we call as Desa Wisata or tourism village, and the local people is educated to create a kind of tourism attraction. And one of the attraction is, for example, like we see the spot to taking picture, giving the snow in the upstream area so they can take picture with the nice background, something like that, just to attract people to come and create a kind of tourism attraction in the surrounding of the Jatibarang Dam. And they also have some, as you know, we call it sambule, people from outside come to the area. And it has been quite interesting to see that in this initiative, it is not only focused on the construction building, not only thinking the construction building, not only, even though the construction itself, we can call it as integrative, as it's already covered the upstream up to the downstream, for example, but it also include the development of the idea to develop the local people who live in the surrounding area. Besides the tourism village, there are also urban farming activities, for example, and also a kind of local people who create local food to put a more value added for the local potential that they have. So essentially what has been done in the area is not also include the local community empowerment. And I think it is a kind of interesting pathway to see how kind of initiative may have a road to become more resilient from time to time, and how they can grow better individually or in the community level or as an institution and a system as general, not only to survive but to be better. Maybe Pak Sander have explained before related with the concept in the ecological resilience if we talk about multiple equilibrium. So what we can learn actually from the program that's at the west, that at the moment already replicated to the east canal, that actually there already some pathway then that we have been moving in Semarang from we call it a sectoral approach to an integrative approach. And from the case of the West Canal development, there are several main integrated components. It includes the integrated water management for the flood control, as I have mentioned earlier. And then there's also urban regeneration program when I mentioned about the people who live along the canal, including the vertical public housing construction. There's also some community development, including the empowerment process, the tourism development, because they also create kind of tourism village, their water monkey forest, and some tourism spots in a tourism spot in the area. And there at the moment, there's also another initiative related to the water supply in the western of Semarang to also cover the needs in the BSB new town. So there's a new town for the settlement and also industrial zone. So the initiative move slowly, gradually from the sectoral to be more integrative. even when we talk about integration in the more longer period, when we talk about that in the perspective of spatial and cross-sectoral for the case of Semarang, what I can tell is what has been happening in the city in general is a gradual process. It's not really a sudden change. It has been a start, maybe at least, based on our elaboration since 1970s. At that time, the cities maybe still dealing with slum issues, move into the housing, the development of the settlement and so on, housing issues in 1980s. And because of the big flood take place in the 1990s, then the gradual process also influenced by the flood issues. And the cross-sector integration has been somehow discovered by several practices and also experiments through kind of solution to integrate the sea level rise solution and at the same time also dealing with the urban flood, also with the traffic. For example, at the moment there are programs to develop the toll road in Semarang. And also we call it as the integrating urban flood management and water provision and urban tourism, as mentioned earlier. Maybe a little bit, talking about the spatial and cross-sectoral integration, learning from the Semarang city, looking at the process. The cities perceive integration as harmonization of individual agency based initiative action because of the jurisdiction authority constraint to accomplish a shared objective. And looking at the output, it involves also goal visioning and iterative strategy, making process to result an optimal outcome and sustainable solution that works for the region. So maybe that is in general how we can see based on the process and based on the output. During the gradual changes, there are also growing cross-sector issues, from infrastructure, informal sector, water-related, and so on. And there are pathways that I call it as from centralization to decentralization, from sectoral to integrated approach, and also from government domination to wider stakeholder participation. And it has been changes across decades, since 1960s up to the current situations where we have been experiencing the greater autonomy from the sectoral to the integrated planning. There's some examples when we talk about the way Semarang has been developed the initiative from the government domination to the wider stakeholder participation through private participation, global network, and also engagement of the community groups. There are some examples that has been done in Semarang City, how they involve different stakeholders to be part of the project. In the West Canal, in the East Canal, there are a lot of different involvement, including different sectors. Also, in the governance system, they develop the city planning support, and it has been taking place. I will not explain one by one, and it has been taking place because they develop the network, and network and opportunities to have experience learning from global networks. Global networks is I think very important to promoting the innovative approach that has been somehow taking place in Semarang City. And the last program related to the flood control and water related issues is the involvement of Semarang in water as leverage program, initiated also by the Dutch government. And there are 3 cities across the world to be chosen as part of this water as leverage program, and Semarang is one of it. And if initially I talk about the integrative process in the West Canal through the water as leverage approach, actually the integration moved toward at the city level, as you can see on the slide. And it is still an ongoing process, yeah. And I think somehow the involvement, again, yeah, when we talk about the integration and the governance, then the participation of different stakeholders is very important and regarded as a very influential part to promote this integration. And to conclude, I might say that the integration of Semarang may be chaotic, yeah, complex, but harmonious, involving different arrays of governance actors. And the scheme are transforming towards a more innovative approach. And there, again, it has been taking place because of wider involvement of different stakeholders. So yeah, I will stop here. I hope it is not very confusing. And thank you very much for your kind attention. And I give the time back to Ibu Wati. Thank you, Bu.
Yeah, thank you, Bu Wiwi. Very great presentation. Yeah, very clear. And finally, we can get good understanding why Pak Sanders say that it is a different challenge, yeah, in developed and developing worlds. It's very different characteristic between the developed and developing countries, because from the two examples from Pak Sander and also from Wiwi from Netherlands and also from Semarang, we can find the different characteristic, the unique characteristic for each example. Okay, thank you, Prof. Sander and also Prof. Wiwi. Now it's time for us to go to the question and answer session, yeah, the discussion session, yeah. Is there any question for the keynote speech? Actually, there are several questions here from Bu Landung, from Mbak Santi, or maybe it's better for Bu Landung and Mbak Santi, you can ask directly. Oh, also Pak Ruko. Where is the student? Okay.
Yes, may I ask questions?
Yeah, okay.
Pak Ruko,
Maybe Pak Ruko first, and after that,
Okay.
Mbak Landung and
I
Bu
know there
Santi,
are
yeah?
some questions as well,
Yeah,
waiting Pak Sanders in the column chat, I think. But I would like to ask short questions. Thank you, Buati, Professor Sander. Nice to see you again. Thank you for your super interesting presentations, particularly about multi-layer water safety. It's interesting. And then you talk about that different layer may have different governance arrangement or system. And one of them is you give example of a nature-based solution and blue-green infrastructure. Can you a little bit give me more explanation the governance of nature-based solution in the Netherlands? How that kind of idea emerged and who the key actor that responsible or take a part, maybe you can give me more explanation about that.
Okay, thank you very much. Shall I reply straight away?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, please.
Thanks. Nice to see you again. The same for me. And interesting question. While looking at, you know, I think you're familiar with that. I mean, the history of the water sector, I mean, it's very much engineering dominated. So it used to be dominated by engineers, and that's in the Dutch context, mainly Delft engineers, you know, from the Department of Civil Engineering, used to thinking about water in technical terms and in terms of infrastructure. So when you talk about these nature-based solutions ideas, using forces of nature to try come up with solutions, green-blue infrastructures, etc. Actually, also space for the river, etc. These ideas actually came more from another, what we call epistemic community, knowledge community. That's more from the community of ecologists. And those also interested in nature, nature development, nature restoration, etc. So they very much pushed these concepts. And then later on, it was also embraced by the engineering community. I mean, the modern Delft engineer also works on nature-based solutions, of course. I mean, and they are also developing their discipline. So that's about the origin of the ideas. I would say it comes more from basically from ecologists, actually. Then talking about the governance, what in my view is the key difference between having a classical dam or dike in place or creating space for water, green-blue infrastructures, etc. That even though a dike is also spatial and you also need space for it, and etc. For nature-based solutions, and the spatial component becomes even more important because you basically need more space. And it's more demanding for other spatial functions. I mean, they indeed need to allow for greening. You need to create a space for the river, etc. So spatial planning as a policy sector comes in and it becomes way more important, I would say, in general, for nature-based solutions than just for the classical dike, dam, whatever type of solution. Well, then spatial planning comes in, land ownership comes in, a whole range of new stakeholders comes in. Well, that has ramifications for consequences for the governance issues, because then indeed you would need multi-stakeholder processes, you would need what Wiwi explained, more integrative planning, etc., to be able to realize these projects. I'm not sure whether that's responding to your question, but that's in my view what are the key governance challenges then for realizing these kinds of solutions. That's about partnerships, that's about cross-sectoral cooperation, stakeholder participation, integration, etc.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Which is extremely difficult, of course, to realize in practice, as you know.
Okay. Thank you so much, Professor Sanders.
Thank you for an interesting question.
Okay, thank you, Pak Sanders. And then maybe Mbak Landung, Bu Landung Esariti, maybe you can ask directly to Pak Sander. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Bu Wati. It's really nice to hear your presentation, Pak Sanders. I came from a research background that never deal with resilience. Now I understand better. Thank you very much. I have a question because my background is about property development, and as I think it's also a classical problem in Indonesia and maybe in many other developing countries, that land use planning could be considered as a key to flood risk management. However, sometimes special patterns could be heavily influenced by the land and property market. Yeah. So this property sometimes has their own right, and then they choose location based on the best utility for the site. So according to your view, what should we approach this kind of problems, and how can you suggest to us as a planner to maybe make a strategic or experiences based on your research or etc. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Excellent question, also a very difficult one to answer.
Sorry.
But yeah, pointing again to some of the differences then between, for example, the Indonesian and the Dutch context. I would say we face sometimes the problem of very important market forces, as well in the Netherlands, of course. So that's a similarity, but I think overall, I mean, the solution that we have in the Netherlands in place, which seems to work rather well, it's basically in this kind, it's just regulating the market. So it's government regulation that, for example, is there to really to inhibit, to forbid any development in a floodplain. It's very strict regulations, and the Rijkswaterstaat, which is the implementation agency of the ministry responsible also for water resources management and for flood safety, they have good regulations in place, and they are also able to enforce them. So if it's forbidden, then no one gets the permit to develop something there, and that basically does not happen. What I pointed to in my presentation, of course, that planners in the past have also made wrong decisions, in my view, wrong decisions, you know, just to allow the development of a hospital near to a river. That has happened.
Yeah.
But that's not due to market forces. That's due to, planning making the wrong decision. Planners making the wrong decisions in the end.
Yeah.
So it's very much traditional government regulation. Just saying, you could say, well, it's a form of zoning as well. Just to say, along the main rivers, we have the floodplains. You should not develop it. What's also true, just to give another example, we do have policy debates in the Netherlands on whether or not we should develop in certain areas, which basically are the lowest part of the deepest part of certain polder areas in the western part of the country, which are below sea level. But still, then within a polder area, you can distinguish between some areas which are a bit more elevated, higher than others. And there is an interesting development. For example, it's called in Dutch, it's the Zuidplaspolder. It's near the city of Gouda, where a new urban neighborhood is being planned, where actually there has been a lot of debate on whether that's a wise decision to develop that area, because from a water management perspective, you would say if something goes wrong, all the water goes there.
Yeah.
And still it's happening. It's in the end the planners who just say, well, we can continue building there, developing there. In the end, the water authorities also decided to cooperate. But you can ask the question there, well, whether it's a wise decision, and also whether indeed market forces somewhere having an interest in developing this area, they definitely play a role there as well, somehow, by lobbying for these projects, etc. So it is an issue, it's still an issue in the Netherlands as well. But overall, I would say that the solution in our context, at least, is government regulations, and they need to be maintained, enforced. But I assume also in the Indonesian context, then it's more like, okay, but the industry then also has a good connection maybe to politicians or to those who have decision-making power, and then maybe, you know, the development still continues, even though experts say maybe it's not a good idea.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Maybe also in Indonesia, we still have to deal with the enforcement issues. That's big thing. Okay. Thank you very much.
I recognize that. From the discussions I have.
Sadly but true.
Thank you.
Thank you, Wati.
Back
to you.
Thank you, Pak Sander and also Mbak Lanum. And there is a third question from Bu Santi Paula Dewi, but because she is the position is not in front of the notebook, so I want to read his question, her question, for Pak Sander and also Bu Wiwi. Bu Santi Paula want to know about the point of view from Prof. Sander and also Prof. Wiwi about climate change and pandemic COVID-19. Do you think that this double hazard somehow will decrease the resiliency for some cities? Because there are several examples. On the other hand, poor communities perhaps include as a vulnerable community regarding climate change. In the same time, they also included as the community that get significant impact on pandemic. Okay. Is it clear enough, Wiwi and Pak Sanders? Or maybe do you want to read by yourself in the chat?
I think the same question is also in the chat. Eh?
Yeah, yeah.
Or basically, yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Who first?
Can you catch the idea? Can you catch the answer question?
Please, Pak Sade, you go first. It's quite difficult.
I go first. Maybe the best idea is that I try to reply from the Dutch perspective and you from the Indonesian perspective. That would make sense, I think. Interesting question. I think I haven't thought about that in this way. So it's an interesting question. Well, the combination to decrease the resilience. I think in the short answer in the Netherlands, I would say no. So I would say no, even though of course we face the consequences of the pandemic, etc. I think nowadays, you may know, we are currently in the process of forming a new government. So the political parties on the national level are negotiating. We don't know that much about what will the final outcome, but there's a lot of signals already that they will spend an awful lot of money for climate policies, both primarily mitigation, carbon reductions. They have to as well, you know, according to all international targets, etc. But also they will invest a lot in adaptation. And they see also this as an opportunity because on the international market, the interest rate now is really low, as you may know. So they can afford to spend a lot of money and to borrow a lot of money on the international market to make all these investments. They make use of this opportunity, like the interest rate is really low now, so we have the luxury of investing billions of euros, etc., in transforming the system, etc. And that, I think that's the idea. And then I don't think the COVID pandemic will influence that development. No, basically, no.
Okay.
That's my impression.
Yeah. That's why there is a different characteristic, between developed country and developing countries. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
I guess so. But I'm curious what Bu Vivi has to say on this.
Yeah. Okay. Miss Bu Vivi.
Thank you, Bu Wati, and thank you for the questions, Bu Santi. I think it's quite challenging questions for all of us to be addressed. But reading your questions, it really reminds me to the adaptive cycle, to the panarchy theory. So basically, when we talk about resilience, it is not like a dead end process. It is like a cyclus. And I believe that at least I understand it this way. We will, through all the disturbance that we deal with. For example, at the moment we have the climate change and we also have the pandemic. Then we will survive in a way because we have a way to address the challenge that we face, the disturbance that we face. And then after we survive, and then we will make a kind of adaptation. And then somehow it really depends on how we deal and how we take an initiative to deal with the disturbance or the issues. But somehow at the certain level, we will grow better. So what I believe, from these double disturbances, in a way, maybe it will push our somehow capacity to become better, or to make us to grow better somehow in the future. Maybe there will be certain period that we have been through last year, maybe when we get the shock, and then we need to survive, and then there's a lot of initiative have been done, including the financial from the government, for example, they can only focus on the pandemic instead of other activities. But then we come to, maybe we will move into the second phase, that we have been pushed to create a kind of adaptation initiative, and then somehow, somewhere in the future, we will have a new equilibrium, yeah, to be better. And maybe the situation in the Netherlands will be different with Indonesia, because the baseline and the situation is also different. But I think we need, what I would like to say, we need to see it as resilience as a cycle. Yeah, I mean, maybe we become resilient in a certain way, but because of some disturbances, maybe we need to survive again, adapt again, and yeah, in a way, grow better. And it's just like a cyclist. Yeah, I don't know, how would you think about that, yeah, Pak Sander? It's just come into my mind when I read these questions.
Yeah, I think it makes sense, definitely. Yeah. But yeah, but for the Dutch context, I'm not so sure. Whether then the COVID, yeah, whether it will increase climate resilience, for example, of cities, I don't think so. Mm-hmm. But it will also not be detrimental to it. I mean, I would say that it doesn't matter, but that's in the, yeah, that's my take on it. That's for what it's worth.
Yeah. Yeah, we cannot easily say it will. Yeah, it's like a complex situation, yeah, Pak. So it's not really easy to.
No. Yeah. But even though you could say, as a country and institutions, due to the COVID, we have learned to be very adaptive, flexible. You know, that's true. In that sense, it's a kind of exercise in being resilient. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And we will also learn, from the COVID pandemic as well, right? I mean, the same process, same pathway.
In the Netherlands, we are all waiting for the next press conference by our Prime Minister, which will be tonight. And it's expected that we will have just another kind of lockdown again in the country. So
really,
yes, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because in spite of the high vaccination rates, it's still the number of people in hospital is increasing again, and it's amazing. Yeah.
So we never know. We really never know, yeah.
No. We'll see. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Bu Wiwi and Pak Sanders, for the answer. Actually, we still have time for one question for student, maybe. Yeah.
Who dares?
Okay.
Yeah, actually, I'm quite afraid to delivering this material for the undergrad students, yeah, Pak. I don't know. As the issues of governance, as you mentioned earlier, it's very abstract, so it's really a challenge for us to show a more concrete, illustration to explain about this governance issues. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay.
But what I found very interesting, Bu Bibi, from your presentation, just if I'm allowed to make one remark, I mean, we are emphasizing, and I did that in my presentation as well, indeed, that you need to be aware of these important differences, between different contexts. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, it's also fascinating that there's so many similarities. When you compare the urbanized part of the Netherlands to Semarang, you say, well, both, the locations extremely vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. Mm-hmm. And you can really ask the question, whether looking 100, 200, 300 years from now, mm-hmm. Even though we have all this infrastructure, what about that? in 100, 200 years from now? I mean, is it sustainable? What and what then are the? I mean, it's nice integrative projects, and that's helpful, of course, for now and for the medium long term, I would say.
Yeah.
But what can you do in the long term? It's interesting, you know. You think about relocation, but we've hardly seen any examples of that from the past. So how to do that? And then maybe the other alternative is then, well, similar to what we've done in the Netherlands, that indeed build all these huge infrastructures and dams and what you have now with the toll roads, etc., to try keep the water out, because that's for me still, as an outsider, still a puzzle.
Yeah.
No, so what can you do?
Yeah.
It's so vulnerable already. And now you have all the climate change scenarios, etc., on top of that. You know, it's worrying.
Yeah. The more you thought about that, sometimes it will be scary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Of course, you're suffering from the COVID pandemic now. But the good thing, of course, is that, I mean, the economy is growing rapidly, of course, in Indonesia. So we will have more and more financial resources then also to build this kind of huge infrastructures, I think.
Yeah. But still, for how long? Still for how long?
Yeah, that's the question. Yeah.
That's the question. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you for your comment, Pak Sander.
Yeah, thank you for your presentation. Yeah.
Okay, thanks for the nice discussion. But because the time is limited, it's time for us to end our discussion today. We will go to the next session, the closing ceremony. There will be a closing remark from the chair of this event, Bapak Iwan Rudiarto. Pak Iwan, are you here?
Yes, hello.
Yeah, Pak Iwan.
I'm listening.
Because today is the last day of our ELS in this semester.
Yeah, of course. Yes, thank you, everybody. So, hello, Sander. How are you there? And also everybody. So, this is the last session of our international lecture series. Then, I follow it also from beginning, but not in a full time for several sessions, for some sessions. But in my opinion, this international lecture series program is a very good program for us, to know each other with international lectures, with our partner, and all, as well as to deepen our collaboration with our external partner, with Radboud University, with Sander, and also with other colleagues, Professor Erwin and also Ari. And we have been also developed some, even after that, we have also been developed some proposals, just after that, with two partners from SNU and also from Technical University of Munich, with different funding, with the Department of Urban and Regional Planning, Diponegoro University, and we hope that the proposal will get funded, hopefully. And I would like to also, thank you very much, say thank you very much to our very nice colleague lecturers in our department for your contributions, and for the committee. I can say this is committee, because we have a small group, so I say this committee, for your help and for your support. And last but not least, with our students, and also our what do you call it, our staff as well at the department, and hope that we will do another or the same program next year, yeah, with the same funding from university, hopefully, and not only to have kind of international lecture, but also to invite, as for example, some of the students, just like we did, yeah, previously 3 times with your students, and just to remind all of you, so that next year we will have. This is also kind of marketing, yeah. Next year we will have a World Planning School Congress in Indonesia, in Bali, yeah, from 29 August until up to 2nd September. So it will be organized by Indonesian School of Planning School of Association, yeah. In collaboration with 3 big universities in planning, Diponegoro Universities, Institut Teknologi Bandung, and Universitas Gadjah Mada. So don't forget, don't miss the date. It will be end of August and early September for this conference. And this is, I think, it is will be a very huge event, yeah, in Indonesia, because we collaborate with all planning schools in the world, yeah, on Earth, yeah, not on the other planet, yeah. Okay, I think that's all from me. But yeah, I would like to say also thank you for the VCU program, World Class University program from Diponegoro University. And okay, that's all I think, yeah. Okay, then nice weekend to everybody. This is November, and I believe November is always rain. That's why you know that Guns N' Roses create the song November Rain, yeah, because you will find rain during the month, yeah. Thank you very much. See you again next year, and stay healthy and always wear your mask. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Pak Iwan, for the nice music for us. Okay, before we end our meeting today, maybe it's better for us to take a photo session together. Yeah, so you can open your camera. Yeah, okay, there are several.
Sorry, Pak Sanda. Sounds very Indonesian that we need to take pictures.
No, this is not only Indonesia.
I recognize this. I remember. Nice.
I will take 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Okay, only 2 pages. It's done. Yes.
Okay.
Thank
Great.
you, Bapak Ibu.
Thank you.
Sanda.
Thank you very much,
Thank you,
Pak Sanda.
everybody.
Thank you so much.
Pak Iwan, selamat
Okay,
ya,
have a
Bu
very
Pak
nice
Iwan.
weekend.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Pasangan panutan.
Thank you.
thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.